The morning fog hung heavy over Pine Ridge as Parker O'Malley trudged through the sleepy neighborhood, his worn canvas bag stuffed with newspapers. His stomach growled in protest, reminding him that he'd given his last sandwich to Maximus, the stray German shepherd that had been following him for weeks. The dog now trotted faithfully beside him, occasionally looking up with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand everything. "Just 3 more houses, Max. Then we can head back," Parker whispered, his breath visible in the crisp morning air. As they approached the elegant white house at the end of the street, Parker noticed something unusual. The front door stood slightly ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. It was early, too early for anyone to be carelessly leaving doors open in this upscale neighborhood. The newspaper boy hesitated, Maximus suddenly alert beside him, ears perked forward. "Hello," Parker called out, climbing the steps to the porch. "Anyone home? I've got your paper." Only silence answered him. Maximus growled softly, the fur on his back rising slightly. Parker should have just left the newspaper and continued on his route. That's what good sense dictated. But something, an odd feeling he couldn't quite place, made him push the door open a bit wider. "Hello, Mrs. Thatcher?" The interior of the house was immaculate, everything in its proper place. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the polished hardwood floors. Nothing seemed amiss except for the open door and the complete silence. Mrs. Thatcher, an elderly woman who always greeted Parker with a warm smile and occasionally a tip, was nowhere to be seen. "Mrs. Thatcher, it's Parker, the newspaper boy." Maximus padded in beside him, nose to the ground, following some invisible trail. The dog moved with purpose toward the back of the house, and Parker, against his better judgment, followed. The kitchen was as spotless as the rest of the house, but on the floor near the refrigerator lay a broken teacup, its contents spilled across the tile. Beside it was Mrs. Thatcher's reading glasses, one lens cracked. Parker's heart began to race. "Mrs. Thatcher!" he called again, louder this time. A weak sound came from the small hallway leading to the back door. Following it, Parker found Mrs. Thatcher lying on the floor, one hand clutching her chest, the other reaching feebly toward him. "Parker," she whispered, her voice strained. "Thank goodness, I need help." Moving quickly, Parker knelt beside her. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "My heart," she managed, her breath coming in short gasps. "Pills. Bathroom cabinet." Parker sprinted to the bathroom, found the small orange prescription bottle, and rushed back with a glass of water. "Mrs." Thatcher took the medication with trembling hands, and Parker helped her sit up against the wall. "Should I call an ambulance?" he asked, already reaching for his phone. Mrs. Thatcher shook her head. "No need now. The pills will help. Just stay a moment." As her breathing steadied, she explained that she'd felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest while making her morning tea. She'd tried to reach the phone but had collapsed in the hallway. "How long have you been here?" Parker asked, noticing how cold her hands were. "Since last night, I think," she said, color slowly returning to her pale face. "I tried calling out, but no one heard me." Maximus had settled beside Mrs. Thatcher, his warm body pressing against her legs, as if lending her his strength. The woman reached out to stroke the dog's head. "Who's this handsome fellow?" she asked with a weak smile. "This is Maximus. He's a stray that's been following me." Mrs. Thatcher studied the dog with newfound interest. "He's no ordinary stray, Parker. Look at how he watches you. He has someone's eyes." Parker had noticed this himself. The way Maximus seemed to observe everything with an almost human intelligence. There was something both comforting and unnerving about it. Once Mrs. Thatcher felt strong enough to move, Parker helped her to the couch in the living room and made her a fresh cup of tea. He called her daughter Emma, who lived across town, to come check on her mother. "You saved my life today, young man," Mrs. Thatcher said as they waited for Emma to arrive. "Not many would have stopped." Parker shrugged uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "Not everyone would notice, and fewer still would act. You have a gift for seeing what others miss, like your canine friend here." Bez. Thatcher reached into a drawer in the side table beside her and pulled out a small ornate wooden box. From it she extracted an old brass key with an unusual pattern etched into its surface. "Take this," she said, pressing the key into Parker's palm. "It opens something important. I've been keeping it safe for a long time, waiting for the right person." Parker stared at the key in confusion. "But what does it open? And why me?" Mrs. Thatcher's eyes twinkled mysteriously. "You'll know when the time comes. Just keep it safe and remember to look carefully at what's right in front of you." Before Parker could ask more questions, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway signaled Emma's arrival. The conversation was cut short as the worried daughter rushed in, fussing over her mother and thanking Parker profusely. As Parker prepared to leave, Mrs. Thatcher caught his eye once more. "Watch those eyes," she whispered, nodding toward Maximus. "They see more than you think." Walking home, the brass key heavy in his pocket, Parker couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Maximus trotted beside him, occasionally glancing up as if checking that Parker was still processing what had occurred. When they reached the small apartment Parker shared with his mother, Josephine, he found her already awake and preparing for her shift at the local diner. "You're late," she remarked, her forehead creased with worry. "Route take longer than usual." Parker hesitated, then told her about finding Mrs. Thatcher and staying to help. He left out the part about the mysterious key, not quite ready to share that peculiar detail. Josephine's expression softened. "You've got your father's heart, Parker, always stopping to help, even when it meant putting yourself last." Her eyes grew distant as they often did when she mentioned Parker's father, who had disappeared many years ago. "I also brought someone home," Parker said, changing the subject. He whistled softly and Maximus padded into the kitchen, his manner suddenly shy. To Parker's surprise, his mother's face went pale. She stared at the German shepherd as if seeing a ghost. "Mom, are you okay?" Josephine blinked rapidly, then forced a smile. "Yes, just... he reminds me of a dog we had once. A long time ago." She approached Maximus slowly, kneeling to look into his eyes. The dog stared back, unblinking, then gently licked her outstretched hand. "His name is Maximus," Parker said. "He's been following me on my route. I've been feeding him when I can." "Maximus," Josephine repeated, her voice strangely distant. "Of course it is." Something in her tone made Parker uneasy. "Do you mind if he stays just until I can find him a home?" Josephine straightened, smoothing her uniform. "He can stay," she said firmly. "In fact, I think he's exactly where he needs to be." With that cryptic statement, she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "There's leftover stew in the fridge. Make sure you both eat." Left alone with Maximus, Parker pulled out the brass key and examined it more closely. The pattern etched into its surface wasn't random as he'd first thought, but a series of tiny interconnected circles, almost like a constellation. "What do you make of this, Max?" he asked, holding the key out for the dog to see. Maximus tilted his head, dark eyes fixed on the key, then raised his gaze to Parker's face. For a moment, the boy could have sworn there was recognition in those eyes, not of the key, but of something deeper, something connected to the strange events unfolding around him. Parker slipped the key back into his pocket and went to warm up the stew. As he prepared 2 bowls, one for himself and one for Maximus, he couldn't shake the feeling that the key, the dog, Mrs. Thatcher, and his mother's odd reaction were all somehow connected. Like pieces of a puzzle he didn't even know he was solving. What he didn't realize was that this puzzle had been waiting for him for a very long time, and that the brass key in his pocket was just the beginning. The real mystery lay in those watchful eyes that followed his every move, eyes that held secrets from a past Parker had never fully known. As night fell over Pine Ridge, Parker settled onto his small bed, Maximus curled at his feet. Outside, a figure stood in the shadows across the street, observing the apartment window where a light still burned. The observer remained perfectly still, patient, as if waiting for something, or someone, to emerge from the careful plans put into motion. Parker dreamed that night of running through endless corridors, searching for a door that would accept his key, while a familiar presence followed just behind him, guiding his steps in the darkness. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm, with Maximus seamlessly integrating into Parker and Josephine's small world. The German Shepherd followed Parker on his paper route each morning, waited patiently outside the school during the day, and spent evenings curled beside the boy as he did his homework. Parker visited Mrs. Thatcher twice, finding her health improved but her manner increasingly cryptic. Each time he mentioned the brass key, she would simply tap the side of her nose and say, "Keep watching those eyes, Parker. The answers are closer than you think." One morning, as Parker delivered the newspaper to Mr. Jenkins' house on Maple Street, the elderly man stepped onto his porch with unusual urgency. "That dog," Mr. Jenkins said, pointing at Maximus. "Where did you find him?" Parker hesitated. "He found me, actually. Been following me for weeks now." "Mr." Jenkins squinted, studying the German Shepherd with intense focus. "He has someone's eyes." The phrase, identical to Mrs. Thatcher's observation, sent a chill down Parker's spine. "What do you mean by that?" Parker asked. Mr. Jenkins knelt with difficulty, extending his hand toward Maximus. The dog approached cautiously, sniffed the offered hand, then allowed a brief pat on his head. "Years ago, Mr. Jenkins began, his voice low, there was a man in town who had a special way with animals, Frederick Ellison. Brilliant fellow. Worked as a veterinarian but had bigger aspirations. Some said he could communicate with animals in ways others couldn't. See into their souls, even. He had a dog just like this one." Parker's curiosity was piqued. "What happened to him?" Mr. Jenkins stood slowly, joints cracking with the effort. "Disappeared. About the same time as your father, if I recall correctly. They were friends, you know." Parker felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "My father knew this man. Frederick Ellison. Oh yes, they were thick as thieves, always working on some project together. Your mother never mentioned it?" Parker shook his head, mind racing. His mother rarely spoke about his father, Thomas O'Malley, and when she did, it was always in vague terms. A kind man, a dreamer, someone who had left to pursue an important opportunity and never returned. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I should finish my route." The old man nodded. "That key you've been fiddling with in your pocket, it looks special." Parker hadn't realized he'd been absent-mindedly touching the brass key through his jacket. "Just something I found," he lied. "Mr." Jenkins smiled knowingly. "Some findings are actually returns, Parker. Remember that." The rest of Parker's route passed in a blur of confusion. By the time he arrived home, he had made a decision. He needed to ask his mother about Frederick Ellison and his father's disappearance. Josephine was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Parker and Maximus entered. The dog immediately went to her, pressing his nose against her hand in greeting, a ritual he'd established since his arrival. "Mom," Parker began, sitting at the small kitchen table, "I need to ask you something important." Josephine's hands stilled over the cutting board. "What is it?" "Did Dad know someone named Frederick Ellison?" The knife clattered to the floor. Josephine bent to retrieve it, her face hidden from view, but Parker could see the tension in her shoulders. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked finally, her voice controlled. "Mr. Jenkins mentioned him today. Said he and Dad were friends, that they worked on projects together." Josephine turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral. "They knew each other, yes. Mr. Jenkins said he disappeared around the same time as Dad, and that he had a dog like Maximus." At the mention of his name, Maximus raised his head, dark eyes moving between Parker and Josephine as if following the conversation. "Parker," Josephine said slowly, "there are things about your father that are complicated, things I've tried to protect you from." "I deserve to know," Parker insisted, pulling the brass key from his pocket and placing it on the table. "Mrs. Thatcher gave me this, said it opens something important." Josephine stared at the key, her face draining of color. After a long moment, she sighed and sat down across from him. "Your father and Frederick were researching something they believed could change everything we understand about the connection between humans and animals. They called it the Empathy Project." Parker leaned forward. "What kind of research?" "They believed that with the right conditions, the bond between a human and an animal could transcend normal limitations. That consciousness could be shared, in a way. Frederick had theories about how intelligence and awareness could be transferred or preserved. That sounds impossible, Parker said, though something in his gut told him otherwise. Josephine's gaze drifted to Maximus, who was now sitting at attention, watching them intently. They were getting close to something real. Too close, according to some people. There were threats, warnings. And then they both vanished. And the key. It opens a safe deposit box at Pine Ridge Bank. I thought it was lost in the fire. What fire? There was a fire at Frederick's veterinary clinic shortly after they disappeared. Everything was destroyed. All their research, their notes. I thought all evidence of the empathy project was gone. Parker picked up the key, studying its intricate pattern. Why would Mrs. Thatcher have this? Frances Thatcher was the benefactor who funded their research. She believed in what they were doing. She must have kept the key all this time, waiting. Waiting for what? Josephine reached out and placed her hand on Maximus's head. The dog leaned into her touch, eyes never leaving her face. For the right time, for when it would be safe. Parker felt a strange sensation, like pieces of a puzzle finally sliding into place. Mom, who does Maximus remind you of? Whose eyes does he have? A tear slipped down Josephine's cheek. When I look into his eyes, I see your father, Parker. I see Thomas looking back at me. The revelation hung in the air between them, simultaneously impossible and perfectly logical. Parker remembered Mrs. Thatcher's words. Watch those eyes. They see more than you think. You think Dad is inside Maximus somehow? That's crazy. Is it? Josephine asked. Look at him, Parker. Really look. Parker turned to Maximus, who met his gaze steadily. There was undeniable intelligence there, a depth of understanding that went beyond animal instinct. The way the dog had found him, followed him, protected him all these weeks. I think, Josephine continued softly, that whatever your father and Frederick discovered, they used it when they were in danger. I think Thomas found a way to preserve himself, to watch over you, until it was safe to return. If that's true, Parker said slowly, then where is Frederick and why now? Why after all this time? Josephine shook her head. I don't know, but I think the answers might be in that safe deposit box. As if in response, Maximus stood and padded to the door, looking back at them expectantly. First thing tomorrow, Parker said, closing his hand around the brass key. We'll go to the bank and open the box. What they didn't know was that someone else was also interested in the contents of that box, someone who had been watching, waiting, and who now realized that the key had finally resurfaced. As darkness fell over Pine Ridge, a shadow moved away from the window of the O'Malley apartment, a phone already pressed to their ear. The boy has the key, the watcher reported, and the dog is with him, just as Frederick predicted. On the other end of the line, a voice responded, Then it's time. After all these years, the empathy project will finally be complete. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Parker, Josephine, and Maximus arrived at Pine Ridge Bank. The brass key felt warm in Parker's palm, as if energized by its proximity to its intended lock. We're early, Josephine whispered, checking her watch. The bank doesn't open for another hour. Parker nodded, eyes scanning the nearly empty street. I know. I wanted to make sure we weren't followed. As if confirming his suspicion, Maximus stood alert, his attention fixed on a black sedan parked across the street. A moment later, the car's engine started, and it pulled away slowly. Someone's definitely interested in what we're doing, Parker said. Inside the bank, a young manager named Haley greeted them with professional courtesy, though her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Maximus. Normally, we don't allow... she began. He's a service dog, Josephine interrupted smoothly. For my son's anxiety. Haley nodded, apparently deciding it wasn't worth questioning. How can I help you today? Parker placed the brass key on the counter. We need to access a safe deposit box. After verifying Josephine's identity and confirming the box was indeed registered under Thomas O'Malley's name, Haley led them to a private room where she unlocked the outer door of the box. She inserted Parker's brass key into the second lock, turned it, and with a satisfying click the box opened. I'll give you some privacy, Haley said, stepping out and closing the door behind her. Inside the box lay a weathered leather journal, a small USB drive, and a sealed envelope addressed simply to "My Family." Parker's hands trembled as he picked up the envelope, breaking the seal with careful fingers. The letter inside was written in a flowing script that Josephine immediately recognized. "That's your father's handwriting," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Parker read aloud. "My dearest Josephine and Parker, if you're reading this, then our contingency plan worked. The key found its way back to you, which means Frances kept her promise. I hope you can forgive me for the years of absence and confusion. What Frederick and I discovered was both miraculous and dangerous, a method to transpose consciousness, to preserve the essence of a being within another vessel. When we realized certain interests wanted to weaponize our research, we had no choice but to disappear. Frederick transferred his consciousness partially into his most trusted companion, his dog Maximus, while I prepared a similar transition. But our process was interrupted. Frederick's transfer was complete, but mine was not. I exist now in a state between present enough to guide Maximus, but not fully embodied. The journal contains all our research. The drive holds the key to completing the process, either to bring us back fully or to reverse what we've done. This choice I leave to you. Know that I have always been watching over you through borrowed eyes. Every moment of your life, Parker, I've witnessed with immense pride." With endless love, Thomas's silence filled the room as Parker finished reading. Maximus whined softly, placing his paw on Parker's knee, those intelligent eyes fixed on the boy's face. Josephine reached for the journal with shaking hands. "All this time," she murmured, "you were right there with us." Parker turned to Maximus, to his father, and found himself at a loss for words. How do you speak to someone who has been there all along, watching silently from behind animal eyes? "The drive," Parker said finally, picking up the small USB. "It must have the program they used. The question is, what do we do with it?" Before Josephine could answer, the door burst open. A tall man in an impeccable suit entered, followed by two others. Parker recognized him immediately from old photographs. Frederick Ellison's business partner, Harold Westmore. "I'll take that," Harold said, his voice cold and precise. "The USB and the journal." Josephine stood protectively in front of Parker. "Harold, I should have known you'd be behind this." Harold smiled thinly. "Behind what, Josephine? The preservation of revolutionary technology? The protection of intellectual property that rightfully belongs to Westmore Pharmaceuticals? Your husband and Frederick stole years of company research when they disappeared." "They were protecting it from being weaponized," Parker countered, clutching the journal tighter. "Weaponized, is that what Thomas told you?" Harold laughed. "Such dramatic framing. We merely wanted to expand the applications. Imagine soldiers able to control animals in combat zones, or intelligence operatives transferring consciousness temporarily to access restricted areas." Maximus growled, low and threatening, positioning himself between the Westmore group and the O'Malleys. "And there he is," Harold said, eyeing the German shepherd with clinical interest. "Frederick Ellison in the flesh, so to speak, the prototype that proved the concept." Parker's mind raced. "You knew all this time?" "We suspected. We've been watching for years, waiting for signs that either Thomas or Frederick had resurfaced. When the dog appeared and found you, we knew they had set their contingency plan in motion." Harold extended his hand. "The materials, please. In return, I'm prepared to offer your family significant compensation for your father's contribution to the project." Parker looked at Maximus, whose eyes held a clear warning. Then he glanced at the journal in his hands, an idea forming. "You know what? You're right," Parker said suddenly. "This technology is worth a fortune, but before I hand it over, I want to know exactly what happened that night, the night my father and Frederick disappeared." Harold hesitated, then shrugged. "Oh, your father became difficult, morally rigid. When he realized the military applications of their work, he threatened to destroy everything. There was an altercation. Frederick used their prototype device to escape through transfer, but Thomas was only partially through the process when our security team arrived. We thought both projects failed until Maximus appeared in town a few weeks ago." While Harold spoke, Parker carefully pressed a sequence of buttons on the USB drive, a sequence he'd noticed etched into its surface, matching the pattern on the brass key. "So you killed my father," Josephine said, her voice steady despite the accusation. "No," Harold corrected. "We interrupted a process. His consciousness is fragmented, partly in the dog, partly in the data systems where the transfer was taking place. He's been in a kind of digital limbo, which is why we need those materials, to complete the work." Parker nodded slowly. "To bring them back, or to make more like them?" "Precisely. And if I refuse?" Harold's expression hardened. "Then we take them by force." "You're in a bank vault with no witnesses except your mother and a dog." Maximus growled again, stepping forward menacingly. One of Harold's men reached inside his jacket. "Wait," Parker said, holding up the USB drive. "No need for that. But before I give you this, I want your word that you'll bring my father back fully." Harold smiled. "Of course, that was always the plan." Parker handed over the USB drive. "It's activated, by the way. I pressed the sequence." Harold's smile faltered. "What sequence?" "The one that executes the program stored on the drive. Dad's contingency plan within the contingency plan." As if on cue, alarms began blaring throughout the bank. On the small security monitor in the corner of the room, they could see bank employees rushing to evacuate customers. "What have you done?" Harold demanded. Parker smiled. The drive contained 2 programs, one to complete the transfer, and one to alert every major news outlet and law enforcement agency about Westmore Pharmaceuticals' illegal human experiments. I'm guessing Dad programmed it to activate the moment the drive was powered on in proximity to the brass key. Harold's face contorted with rage. He lunged for Parker, but Maximus was faster. The German shepherd leaped, knocking Harold backwards into his associates. In the confusion, Josephine grabbed the journal and pulled Parker toward the door. They ran through the bank, Maximus at their heels, as security guards converged on the vault area. Outside, police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. "Where do we go?" Parker gasped as they reached the street. "Home," Josephine said firmly. "Your father's journal will have answers." Back in their apartment, with doors locked and curtains drawn, Parker and Josephine pored over Thomas's journal. The pages detailed the empathy project from its inception to its dramatic conclusion, including a final protocol, a way to reverse the consciousness transfer or to complete it. "He left us a choice," Parker said, tracing the diagrams with his finger. "We can bring him back fully, but it would mean losing Maximus," Josephine finished softly. The German shepherd sat watching them, his dark eyes reflecting an understanding beyond animal comprehension. He nudged the journal with his nose, turning to a specific page that contained a handwritten note. "The vessel and the consciousness have become intertwined. To separate them now would damage both. Better to find a balance, a shared existence. The protocol included here will stabilize what was begun, allowing both to coexist." Parker looked at Maximus, at his father, with tears in his eyes. "Is that what you want? To stay like this?" Maximus pressed his head against Parker's hand, then moved to do the same to Josephine. The gesture was clear. He wanted to remain with them in whatever form was possible. The following weeks brought dramatic changes to Pine Ridge. Harold Westmore and several executives from Westmore Pharmaceuticals were arrested for corporate espionage, illegal human experimentation, and attempted assault. The investigation uncovered decades of unethical research hidden behind legitimate pharmaceutical developments. Mrs. Thatcher, recovering well from her health scare, was vindicated in her long-standing support of Thomas and Frederick's ethical approach to the empathy project. With the legitimate aspects of the research now in the public domain, she established a foundation to continue exploring the positive applications of human-animal communication, with Josephine as its director. Mr. Jenkins, whose careful observations had helped Parker connect the dots, became a regular visitor to the O'Malley home, often bringing treats for Maximus and stories about Thomas and Frederick from years past. As for Maximus, the stabilization protocol from Thomas's journal worked perfectly. The dog retained his unique intelligence and connection to Thomas's consciousness, while also embracing his canine nature. He remained the faithful guardian of the O'Malley family, his watchful eyes now a source of comfort rather than mystery. Parker returned to his paper route with Maximus by his side, but now delivered more than just newspapers. He became known throughout Pine Ridge as someone who noticed things others missed, who helped those in need, and who understood the value of connection, whether human, animal, or something wonderfully in between. On quiet evenings, when the three of them sat together in their small living room, Parker sometimes caught Maximus watching him with an expression of unmistakable pride. In those moments, he knew with certainty that his father was still there, still guiding him, still loving him, just as he always had been through those watchful eyes. And in Pine Ridge, the story of the boy, the dog, and the brass key became something of a legend. A reminder that love finds ways to endure, that kindness creates its own rewards, and that the bonds we form transcend all boundaries, even the ones between species. For Parker, who had once given his last meal to a stray dog, the reward had indeed been most unexpected. He had lost a father only to find him again in the most extraordinary way, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in plain sight, if only we have the wisdom to truly see. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the world of captivating stories. I trust you found today's narrative as engaging as I did. If you enjoyed this exploration into fascinating and compelling narratives, kindly indicate your appreciation by liking this video. Are you watching on mobile? Show your appreciation with a double tap for hype. For more captivating stories and journeys into the heart of compelling storytelling, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss a single upload. Your thoughts and interpretations are most welcome. Please share your perspectives on today's story in the comments below. And if you believe others would find this content engaging, please consider sharing the video with your network. Until our next journey into the world of captivating tales, I bid you farewell.